Hello, my friend Kara.
Hello, Nancy. So nice to see you.
So nice to see you. And I'm kind of bittersweet because you and I have been doing these frequently over the last 3 months while Sue has been on her very well-deserved renewal leave. And Sue's back
Yes,
this week.
that's right. I know they're
Um,
excited about that.
so I miss you already.
Oh, thank you. We shall do this again someday.
Yes.
I know
And
we
there'll be
will.
other experiences and experiments that we'll be doing together.
That's right. Yes.
So, your sermon this last Sunday, what really caught my attention, and I'm kind of embarrassed about this, is you're in hospice and you see people transitioning and the impact of that transitioning, on their family and friends and probably the caregivers that are supporting them. And so, and the sermon was all about, God is always working in us,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we're never done
That's
type.
right.
And so what I'd love for you to share with the audience is how did you get into hospice work? I mean, what was that journey like for you?
Yeah. Well, I'd say it goes back about 23 years, to be honest, when my dad was in the hospital and he was going to be going home the next day. Dad had some heart issues. He was 64 at the time, and he had decided to not have a quadruple bypass surgery that they knew he needed because of some diabetes related heart problems. So he opted not to do the bypass surgery because of some other health issues he was having. They didn't give him very good odds of living through the surgery itself, let alone recovering. And so he said, I'm going to take the time I have and I'm going to live my life to the fullest, and I'll take quality over quantity. So that day that he was supposed to go home the next day was Thanksgiving. And so my mom and I went to the hospital to visit my dad. We took some pineapple and we took some pumpkin pie and things like that to tempt his appetite. And at one point, he was resting. She and I decided to go down to the cafeteria and have a little bit of lunch. And I had this experience in the cafeteria that a lot of people will think I'm insane for saying this. But when I turned on that microwave, I had this vision come over me, and it was all of these images of my childhood when my mother would take me to visit people who were ill or homebound. And she did that for our church. And I saw firsthand how much she blessed those people. She would bring them flowers from our garden. She would bring them bread that had just come out of the oven. She would just lighten their day. And so, in this vision or whatever I was experiencing, I was seeing these images of these visits I'd taken with my mom. And it was like a transformative experience for me.
Wow.
I decided I needed to go to seminary that day. I decided that I needed to start doing what my mom had been doing and that I got to observe when I was young. So this was in my late 20s, 30. I was 30. So, no, I was 28. 28. So this was, a long time after those visits that these images came washing over me. So I went to seminary and I trained to be a chaplain. And I did a year residency after seminary in the inner city Chicago hospital that was life changing. And had a lot of sad moments and a lot of joyful moments because I worked with a gaggle of Nigerian priests that were the most joyful thing I'd ever been around. They laughed all the time, they had the most joyful spirits, and I got to work with them, and that was wonderful. So, anyway, I got brought out to Nebraska for a job as a hospital chaplain. That's what brought me to Nebraska. And I did that for a while, and then I kind of felt, well, I'm looking for a little more balance in my life. There's a lot of death and dying. I need a little more joy and living in my life. So I went into the parish for a time. And then I felt I needed to go back into that chaplaincy world. And this time I decided I was going to do end of life care because for me, that is one of the most sacred times in an individual's life and in a family's life, because here are these beautiful souls that are coming to terms with the fact that their lives are waning. And for many of them, if not most of them, they had faith that it wasn't the end, but that there was more out there that would happen to them, things they didn't understand or even could imagine, but that they believed were there. So I decided to go into this field because it is such holy work, not just for a pastor, but for anybody that's invited into that sacred space at the bedside with the family and the patient. And you just realize that this is sacred ground that you're standing on. So that's kind of how I got into hospice chaplaincy ministry. And it's kind of a continuation of what I've done all along since I went to seminary, which is just visiting people, praying with people, listening to people, um, helping them find meaning and purpose in their lives. Except for in this instance, it's for people that know they are done with their life almost, and they need to find meaning and purpose in what has happened, not in what will happen. So yeah, it's an amazing experience to be invited into that space. It is an honor.
Oh, I just, well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. What an incredible journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I will just say, I appreciate the sacredness. This is actually how I got reconnected to First Presbyterian Church, because my mother was transitioning, and we made it, collectively over Thanksgiving a couple of years ago, she made the decision. I just want to die. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, let's do that. And she's like, please stay with me. So I'm like, I will stay with you. So we transitioned from, um, she was at assisted living, and then she fell. So then she was at nursing home, and then we transitioned her to Journey Home, the hospice place. And this was still kind of, we were in the pandemic still a little bit.
Right.
But what was so great was I could just tuck in. So I stayed 11 days with my mother, 24/7 in that room.
Wow.
My brother would bring me provisions. He would bring me takeaway food and a glass of wine because I couldn't, again, with COVID, they didn't, you didn't really want a lot of people coming and going.
Right.
I made a promise to my mom to stay with her.
Right.
And it was sacred place. I mean, it, oh, I knew it was sacred, sacred.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what was great is my mother was extremely deaf in this dimension, but I knew she was going to hear everything as she was transitioning. And
Mm-hmm.
so we had conversations that we wouldn't have had, you know.
Right.
And I'm like, Mom, remember this. And oh, forgive me for that. And I forgive you for this. And
Mm-hmm.
remember this. And oh, that. So I got to have all those conversations with my mom,
That's wonderful.
you
That
know,
is wonderful. Yes. What
and
a gift.
yeah, and your colleagues would come in and just so wonderfully, wonderfully take care of her. And I'm like, let's get her a bath, let's do this. Um, and help me understand kind of what was happening and what to expect. But the night before she passed, I'm like, Mom, I need a full night's sleep. Can you not pass until the morning?
Oh gosh.
And she didn't. She didn't. She
Oh.
didn't start really, the final part of it until I shower, until the morning, and because I would walk down the hall and shower.
Mm.
and come back to the room. And I'm like, thank you for that, because it was going to be a busy day.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where I got reacquainted with Dr. Sue at First Presbyterian, because she visited.
Okay.
So, and here we
Nice.
and here we are. You and I are having this conversation.
That's
But
right.
sacred space for sure. And
Yeah.
I just I'm so grateful that I got to spend really 24
Mm.
by 7 with my mom the last 3
Mm.
weeks of her life.
Right. I think the fabric between this world and the next is incredibly thin in places. And that is one of those places and times in an individual's life where that fabric is very thin, and the and and everything kind of mixes together, you know. There are a lot of instances where people will be talking to loved ones who have gone before them, and people might say, well, that's the medication, well, that's just the hallucinations that come with the disease. Well, what if it's real? What if it really is Aunt Barbara and she is sitting in that chair because she has come to help this person transition into the next world? What if that's possible?
Yeah. So there's a very well respected physician here in Minnesota, and he started the integrative medicine kind of community here in Minnesota. He was a family practice person, and his wife was transitioning, and his his sister, and I think somebody else was in the room at the time too. So they all saw this. They all saw this, and they've written a book since
Mm.
about this. So as she was kind of in her final stages of transitioning, they all saw the ceiling open up and beings reach their hands down and carry her soul up.
Oh my
All three of
goodness.
them,
Wow.
all three of them saw this.
Wow. That's amazing. And again, people would say, "Oh, that's not possible. Something has to explain it rationally." But why do we have to understand everything that happens?
And I don't think we're meant to. Life is supposed to be a mystery. If we knew how life was going to go, we'd be so bored. We wouldn't pick up the book. We wouldn't go to the movie.
You're right.
Like,
Yeah.
and actually, we wouldn't go to the movie or read the book if there wasn't ups and downs and challenges and opportunities, and right, for
Right.
all these things. So as much as we want peace, we all want peace for ourselves and others, right? But peace in the context of chaos,
That's right. That's right.
because the
If
chaos,
there wasn't chaos, we wouldn't need the peace.
we'd be bored,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, so interesting. Okay, so Kara, see why I could just move in with you and talk forever. Um, so in your sermon, you were saying, God is always working in us. So how does that show up? Like when you're in this sacred space with people who are transitioning and the family members and whoever else comes to visit, and even the caregiver. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
how does that show up?
Well, I think it shows up in ways we can see, but especially in ways we cannot see with our eyes. But you can see it. You can see the signs of it, signs of the work that God is working in that person's life. Because I don't believe God ever stops working in us, even after we are dead. I believe God is with us, and that God's grace is bigger than anything else, and so it continues. I don't think that that's the end of the story when we die, obviously, but I see God working in people in different ways. There are some patients that are um, they're very anxious. They're very concerned about what will it be like to die, and what will these coming days, weeks, months, hours hold for me and for my family. And one of the things you see as you spend time with people is they come to have a peace about them, where they kind of evolve into a place where they're asking these questions, they're having honest conversations with not only their family or their chaplain, but with their God as well. And they evolve into a place where they have found peace and they welcome death. They see it as a friend, and that it is, and that it is the beginning of something new and amazing that we cannot put words to, but that is there nonetheless. So that, I believe, is one way that God works through us at the end of our life, is to help us find peace. I also think God works through us in the restoration of relationships that happen at the deathbed. Often in the visits that happen, there are "I'm sorry's," there are "I forgive you," there are just a lot of storytelling that is healing to people, because telling about someone's life is sacred. It is a witness to who they were and are and who they will always be. Um, and there's a lot of healing that comes through storytelling. So that's another way I think God works in their lives. I also know that there are people that don't profess to have a faith of any kind as they come into this stage of their life, that as we kind of walk with them, whether it's me as a chaplain or nurses, social workers, families, whatever, they come to be open to the possibility that maybe there is a God in this world. Maybe there is love for me. Maybe there is hope in the midst of this hopelessness, apparent hopelessness. And so that transformation is maybe one of the most powerful ones, because it's never too late to decide that you want to explore your faith. It's never too late to decide that maybe God might be real. There's never a point at which God says, okay, either you just decide now and you're in, or you don't and you're out. There's never that point for me, because grace, because of grace, there's never that point where God will say, well, I'm sorry, you missed the deadline and I'm not going to love you anymore. That's garbage. So there's something very sacred about the evolution of a heart and a spirit into one that can accept that there's love out there for them, by some sort of a being that we cannot understand. So that's another way God works in their lives. It's pretty powerful to see the peace that comes over somebody when they realize that death is a friend, and a means through which they have to go to get to where they really want to be, which is the next life.
Yeah. How beautiful.
Yeah.
How beautiful.
Mm.
I think the other thing is what I experienced with the time with my mom is there were all these different caregivers. And again, it was the pandemic, it was Thanksgiving. And so no two days would the staff be the same. I didn't have any consistent
Mm.
nurse, and and so I would see people like every third day, because they were taking time off to go to spend time with, and then we had the traveling nurses and whatnot. But it also showed up for me when a couple of, I'll say, caregivers, different roles, nurses aides, would be so kind to my mom.
Mm. Yes.
In some challenging situations.
Yeah.
And then they were also so kind to me because I'm just like, what should we do here? Because there was this moment, it's like, well, do we do rehab and she goes back to assisted living, or do we do this? I mean, you know, um, and the social, the social worker, like, well, if this, then that, blah, blah, blah. And I went to go like I went home to do something. I wasn't I wasn't even gone 30 minutes. And then that 30 minutes she had had a stroke.
Oh,
So
Nancy.
just when we thought she was going to be moving back to assisted living after some time in rehab, the stroke just kind of did it.
Wow.
But a couple of, you know, nurses age just like you just have to come to terms with this. Like you have to make the call,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, there I am having a conversation with my mother who's extremely deaf and now not wearing her hearing aids at all. And I'm writing everything on the chalkboard,
Yeah.
you know, because I want it to be her decision. And so it, um, you know, I needed these two angels to say, she's not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then I'm like, but I needed to have her make the call,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
She's been making her own decisions for the last 60 years. I'm not going to let the last one be. You know, she's 94, living just fine.
Right.
Um, so what I appreciated is that I got the help I needed to.
Yes. And that's one of the biggest
All this
parts.
to my brother and my sister, because my sister's in there, you know, I'm like, lots of phone calls,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because everybody's kind of got to be on board, but I was the only one there,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. And you've got to care for those family members as well as the patients. That's so important.
Mm-hmm. So I experienced that grace you talked about, and it showed up in different layers,
Mm-hmm.
different levels, different days, different ways, through
Mm-hmm.
different, you know, humans. Um, yeah, it was sweet.
Yeah.
Really, it was. I tell my mom, I went for a little walk before you and I connected. And I'm like, thanks, Mom. You would enjoy this walk today, right? So thanks for being with me. Thank you for
Mm.
that sacred time.
Oh,
Like it was an honor.
yeah. It is. It is an honor because there's a lot of vulnerability at that point in our life. You know, for a lot of people, if not all of them, they have lost the independence that they once had to not only feed themselves, but keep themselves clean, take themselves to the restroom, and a myriad other things. And so there's a lot of vulnerability. And for someone to be willing to let me into that space or a family member is a real gift, because if I wonder how will I be one day if I'm in this position, which we all will be at some point. How will I be? Will I be like, everybody stay away? You know, my hair's not done. You know, or will I be like, come on in, pull up a chair, take me as I am? You
Yeah.
know, so it's a very gracious thing to say, yes, you can come be a part of this beautiful mess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
I did have to share. So some, you know, some of my family members would come and they would tell some not kind reminiscing stories about my mom. I'm like, she's listening.
Yes. Oh yes.
She's listening to every word, and she too did the best she could.
That's right. Oh yeah. That's all we can do. And we will fall short at times.
Yeah, and we never know what somebody's life lessons were, what their life journeys. And then I always feel, because I'm at the age that I'm not alone. Most of my friends' parents are transitioning. So this is
Mhm.
often the conversation we're having.
Mhm.
And there's always that I think often there's that tug of war. Are they going to make it and be alive a little bit longer? And what do we do about
Mhm.
that? Are they not going to make it? What do we do about that?
Mhm.
And so it's a roller coaster ride
Yes.
as the family, right? And I love your perspective on all that. I think that's part of that transitioning. I think the negotiation that the soul is having with God.
Mm-hmm.
It's a negotiate. Well, how about this and how about that? What about this? What about that? I mean, do you feel that that's kind of part of it?
Yeah, in fact, when people often will say, "Why is it taking so long? How is it possible that they are still alive after this long? They haven't eaten, they haven't had anything to drink, they haven't been conscious for X number of days. How is it possible that they are still hanging on?" And I'll say something like, we never know what negotiations are going on right now. Maybe she's debating what kind of wallpaper she wants in her house. Who knows, because none of us, and there's a resilience there that goes way beyond the physical. There is, I believe, a spiritual resilience that makes it so that we can't count people out until the time comes for them to pass, because too many times it breaks the mold of how it should be, that people hang on or whatnot. But yes, I think that, maybe that conversation is happening at that point where God says, and I'm not sure how I feel about this whole thing, the idea of us standing before God and God ticking off our sins. I don't know how I feel about that. I
That
think
life
that,
review.
yeah, like we're being graded or judged. I'm a little bit more, I guess I'm a little bit more uncomfortable with that idea than with the idea that we just get welcomed with this huge hug. And God says, "I'm so glad you're here and I love you and I forgive you." I guess, who knows? But maybe that is the time when negotiations are going on.
In some of the readings and research that I do, I really like this notion that every soul chooses when and how they come in, and every soul chooses when and how they exit. Because free will is the law,
Right,
right?
right.
And I was kind of revisiting some of that in conjunction with some of the increase in suicides, especially with young people today. And and there is this kind of notion of, don't judge a life by the shortness of it, and don't judge a life by the way the exit.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
The soul chose,
Right.
and God doesn't have to forgive us because God's never condemned us.
Mm.
God
Right.
is only love, right?
Mm.
So there's no right or wrong in God's world. There's just love.
Mm.
And this is a grand experiment we're all on.
Some experiment, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right? So, oh, Kara, I could talk to you forever. Thank you for just sharing a little bit more about you and your important work and your perspective as you help people.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nancy. I always enjoy our conversations. I learn a lot.
Same here. Thank you so much. Take
All
good
right.
care.
You take care.
Thanks for joining us at First Presbyterian Church, where faith is nurtured, curiosity encouraged, diversity welcomed, and all are loved. Find out more about us at fpclincoln.org.